Walk into any room and you'll instinctively assume that the person talking the most, or the one with the biggest title, is the one in charge. You'll usually be wrong. And acting on that mistake is exactly how capable people get quietly outmaneuvered by someone they never even saw as a threat. Real power almost never sits where the nameplate says it does. But it does leave signals, small involuntary ones, that the people holding it can't fully hide. In the next few minutes, you'll learn to read those signals and spot the person who actually decides, often in under 60 seconds, long before they ever reveal themselves. Let's start with the belief that gets people burned, because it feels completely reasonable. The belief is that power is loud. The person running the meeting, doing most of the talking, holding the senior title, controlling the slides, that must be the one who decides. So you aim everything at them. You pitch to them, you defer to them, you work to win them over. And then the decision quietly goes another way entirely. Shaped by someone who barely spoke. You've almost certainly lived this. The impressive, articulate person at the front turns out to be a spokesperson, not a decider. Meanwhile, someone off to the side who said almost nothing, gave one small nod, and the whole thing tilted. Here's why the mistake is so common. We're trained from school onward to equate visibility with authority, confidence with control, and volume with status. But in the real world, those two things routinely come apart. The loudest person is often the one auditioning for power. The quiet one they keep glancing at is the one who already has it. So if title and volume are unreliable, what actually tells you who decides? The room is telling you constantly. You just have to learn its language. Here is the mechanism. Real power doesn't announce itself with words. It reveals itself in where attention flows. In any group, human attention behaves like water. It runs unconsciously toward the person who actually controls outcomes, and you can watch it move. The first and most reliable signal is what I'll call the check-in glance. Watch what people's eyes do in the half second before they commit to a position. They flick involuntarily toward the person whose approval actually matters, checking for a reaction before they fully speak. That glance is a vote. Count the glances and you've found the decision maker. No title required. Authority, in other words, is the direction of deference, not the volume of speech, not the seat at the head of the table. The direction everyone's nervous system leans. The second signal is interruption immunity. In every room, some people can interrupt without any cost, and others go instantly quiet the moment they're cut off. Watch who talks over whom, and crucially, who lets it happen without pushing back. The person who can interrupt freely and who is never successfully interrupted is sitting near the top of the real hierarchy. The third signal is language softening. Listen to how people's speech changes depending on who they're addressing. Toward the person who holds power, language gets more hedged, more qualified, more careful. People add cushioning words. They seek agreement. Flattery and deference point at power like a compass needle. Track whose presence makes everyone else's language go soft, and you've found the center of gravity. There's a fourth, quieter signal. Who sets the tempo? Watch who can slow the room down, change the subject, or end a thread, and have everyone simply follow. Controlling the pace of a conversation is controlling the conversation. Now, why does any of this work at the level of the brain? Because we are wired to defer to perceived authority, and that wiring is far stronger than we like to admit. Stanley Milgram's study obedience experiments in the 1960s showed how far ordinary people would go simply because an authority figure stood beside them and told them to continue. But the detail that matters most for you is what happened when Milgram varied the setup. When the authority figure left the room and gave instructions remotely, obedience collapsed. Presence and proximity, not the title on a badge, drove the deference. That is the entire game in one finding. Power lives in the felt presence people orient to, and that presence is visible if you know where to look. So stop listening only to who is talking. Start watching where the room keeps leaning. It is voting continuously with its attention. Your only job is to count the votes. Now the evidence, and for this we go to 13 days in October of 1962, when the stakes of reading a room correctly were nothing less than nuclear war. American spy planes discover Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, 90 miles from Florida. President John F. Kennedy convenes a group of his closest advisors, later known as the Ex-Com, to decide how to respond. The early momentum in the room is toward a military airstrike on the missile sites. And here Kennedy notices something that most leaders never catch about themselves. He realizes that whenever he, the president, is in the room and signals what he seems to prefer, the discussion quietly bends toward it. The sheer deference to his authority is distorting the very debate he desperately needs to be honest and unfiltered. The attention in the room keeps flowing toward him, and so the room stops truly thinking and starts trying to please. So Kennedy does something remarkable, something that only makes sense once you understand the mechanism. He deliberately absents himself from key sessions. He physically leaves the room. With the highest status person gone, the flow of attention has nowhere to pool. The deference has no target. And suddenly, the real advocates emerge. The genuine arguments get tested against each other, and dissent that would have been swallowed in his presence finally surfaces. His brother Robert Kennedy and others push the discussion, and out of that freer debate comes not the reflexive airstrike, but the naval blockade, a measured option that gives everyone room to step back from the brink. That choice arguably prevents a war. And notice what actually happened here. Kennedy understood that his own presence was warping the room's attention. He read the flow of deference so precisely that he knew the only way to see what people really thought was to remove himself as the thing they were all unconsciously watching. He wasn't reading who held power in the room. He was the power in the room, and he was disciplined enough to take himself off the board so the truth could surface. That is a masterclass in the mechanism from the other side. The man everyone defers to, using his understanding of deference to engineer a better decision. For you sitting in ordinary rooms, the lesson inverts cleanly. If attention bends toward one person and everyone performs for them, you have found your decision maker. And if you ever become that person, remember that your presence changes what people are willing to say in front of you. But here is where amateurs get burned, and where reading the room done naively will lead you completely astray. Because the live room is very often theater. The performance you're watching, the debate, the deliberation, the apparent decision, may be exactly that, a performance, because the real decision was already made before anyone walked in. The single most important meeting is frequently the one before the meeting. A quiet hallway conversation, a phone call the night before, a word exchange between two people over dinner. By the time the official room convenes, the outcome is settled, and everything you're carefully decoding is just the ceremony of ratifying it. Read only the room in front of you, and you will brilliantly decode a script while the actual power operated entirely off stage. There's a second trap, just as old. History is full of the figure called the power behind the throne. The eminence grise, the gray eminence. In 17th century France, Cardinal Richelieu effectively ran the country while the king held the title, and behind Richelieu operated his own shadow advisor, Father Joseph, the original gray eminence, a man with no formal power who shaped enormous decisions. The person with the crown, the corner office, the visible authority, is sometimes a front for someone who never appears in the room at all. So the rule has to invert under a specific condition. When a decision feels strangely pre-cooked, when the debate seems oddly hollow, when the visible leader keeps deferring in small ways to someone unexpected. Stop reading the room in front of you and start finding the room you weren't invited to. Deference cues are powerful, but they only tell you who holds power inside this room right now. They cannot tell you whether the real power was already exercised somewhere you weren't, by someone you'll never see perform. The complete skill, then, is two-layered. Read the visible room fluently, and stay humble enough to ask every time whether the decision you're watching is actually being made here or merely being announced here. So let's turn this into something you can run in your very next meeting. 5 moves. 1. Find the check-in glance on purpose. Early on, ask a mildly contested question, something with no obvious safe answer. Then watch the eyes, not the mouths. Where do people glance in the half second before they respond? That direction is your decision maker. You've located real power while everyone else is still listening to words. 2. Track interruption immunity. Quietly note who cuts in without any social cost and who surrenders the floor the instant they're interrupted. Power is simply whoever isn't penalized for taking it. The hierarchy of the room writes itself in who yields to whom. 3. Listen for language softening. Notice whose presence makes everyone else hedge, qualify, and seek agreement. When the room's language goes careful around one person, that person is the center of gravity, whatever their title. 4. Control your own tells. This one protects you. The moment you visibly defer to whoever you think is in charge, you broadcast your read and hand away leverage. Keep your own attention disciplined. Don't perform your deference. Let others reveal the hierarchy while you quietly map it. 5. Hunt the pre-meeting. Before you ever walk in, ask yourself, has this decision likely already been made? And if so, by whom and where? If the room feels rehearsed, the real work happened earlier, and your job is to get into that earlier conversation next time, not to win the ceremony. Do these consistently and rooms become almost transparent? You'll stop pitching to the impressive spokesperson and start reaching the quiet person who actually decides, which is the entire difference between being managed by a room and quietly reading it. But reading who holds power is only useful if you can stay composed once you've found them and once the pressure is on you. Because the people who truly control rooms share one trait that has nothing to do with rank or volume and everything to do with their nervous system. Next, we break down why the calmest person in the room is so often the one quietly running it. Watch that one next.